Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mining Now. I'm your host, Jared Downey. Today on the show, we have Lon Shaver. He is the Vice President of Silvercorp Metals. Lon's been on the show before, and we did a lot of overview of the company this time. We're going to touch on it for those of you who didn't see that first episode, and there will be a link in the video to see that first one. But this one, we're going to go into some of their investments, their expansions, and also look at some of their operations and the advantages, some huge advantages that they have in the market. So, Lon, welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Thanks, Jared. It's a pleasure to be here.
Our last one was through... I think that was still when we weren't allowed to be in the same room.
That's right.
So now we're back in person and just sort of have time to walk through things. And so for this one, I find with the in-person, you do get a little more time to sort of, walk through information. And I want to go over Silvercorp again and just give that sort of bird's eye view. You sent us a slide that sort of breaks down the investments, the cash, which are incredible. I was saying off air that I'm a little jealous. But can you just walk us through that again for Silvercorp?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that slide, I don't think we had it in the book when we chatted last time, and we added it for a specific reason, really just to give a snapshot of the company, which I think a lot of people don't pick up on. When you look at the slide, everyone thinks of us from the red box at the bottom, which is showing our really the performance of our mining operations. But the other two boxes are equally important because when you buy a share of the company, you're getting exposure to all these three assets. And one way that we like to think of it is if you look at the current market cap of the company, which is $550 million US. We're currently standing with $200 million in cash on the balance sheet. And so,
wild.
So that's kind of an easy number. It's pretty easy to calculate. We have an investment portfolio. That's the next box down. That investment portfolio as of March, the last time we did our financials, was $140 million. And that's predominantly a large stake, 28% position in another public company called New Pacific, which is advancing some very promising projects in Bolivia, and we can go into that later. But if you do the math and you work backwards and take that market cap, deduct the cash, and deduct the investment portfolio, it kind of means the market is attributing a $200 million value to our mining assets, and we think this grossly underappreciates what they're doing. Operating cash flow for the mines for the year ended March was $85 million US. So from a valuation standpoint, we think that the market's missing something here.
I want to go into the operations for a second because to essentially pile up that much cash, be able to make those investments. I saw another thing. You had no financing since 2010. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
What is the approach? Is it the setup of the operations that have allowed, that kind of revenue to stick? What is it that's allowed you to build up that type of cash?
I mean, it really comes down to finding good assets and building them up in a fashion, staying on top of them from management standpoint, but asset quality and management focus on making sure that they're profitable year in and year out. And so even through that mining nuclear winter that we all like to forget when commodity prices and share prices and everyone sort of forgot the sector, the mines were still making money and putting money on the balance sheet. And that's why the company hasn't had to do any equity financings when many of our peers, if you look at their share count, has ballooned through those years because of having to issue more and more stock to cover obligations, and also from acquisitions that they did that didn't really deliver on the earnings front.
Do you think people understand? I mean, you're here educating people, but just in general, when you're out, you go to a mining event, do you think people understand the type of operation that Silvercorp is delivering?
I think not, and I think on a couple of reasons. Our mines are in China, and I think that sort of raises concerns for some people. Ironically, people have no problem investing in other Western companies that have their operations, manufacturing, et cetera, in China. But I think from a mining standpoint, that maybe is something that causes people some concern. But our operations are run real well, and when we have site visits, and we've had a few recently, people come back truly impressed with the attention to detail, attention to the environment, attention to safety, and really the focus we put into optimizing operations where we can, adding technology into the mix, and that's what's helped us run smoothly and profitably through the years.
And do you think even that, just you said, people see that the mine is getting operated in China, so that sort of that raises a flag for them, and then, but yeah, if you any of the manufacturers are getting equipment out of China and parts out of China. So is it again, it's just that educational gap that's happening?
I think so. And I think people miss the fact that from a supply chain standpoint, for a lot of the products that we're now buying around the world, the manufacturing is done in China. The commodities, whether they come from China or elsewhere, are shipped to China for processing. And of course, we're located right where the action is. And so our concentrates that we produce at our mines are shipped to smelters locally. There's definitely some advantages to that as opposed to a South American miner who's got to get the concentrates from the mine down to a port.
Pit to port is this big discussion there, but you don't even have that.
No, we don't have that at all. Yeah. And our customers actually, when we've arranged a transaction for our concentrates, our smelter customers pay us in advance, and they send their own trucks and pick the concentrates up from our mine. So, so we don't really have any issues with transportation, logistics, or working capital related to our sales.
Can we expand a little bit more on the mine equities, the blue section, and talk about that investment in New Pacific? What do their operations look like?
Well, so New Pacific was a public company, and it had some association with Silvercorp, and it got introduced to this first project in Bolivia in 2016 after a visit by the management team. Realized, wow, there's an interesting opportunity here. There was evidence of former mining activity. Some of the dumps actually graded quite attractively in silver. So the acquisition was made in 2017. And Silvercorp stepped up and helped fund that acquisition. And it was, at that time, still really quite a raw exploration project, but let's just say with a lot of promise that was well recognized by management. And through that acquisition and then subsequent exploration led to discovery, an initial resource, which was first announced in 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. That project, Silver Sand, has now advanced to have a second resource that was put out late last year and a PEA at the beginning of the year. And from a project standpoint, has some very unique characteristics. It's silver only. It's going to produce approximately 170 million ounces of silver over a 14-year mine life. But the real kicker is that the first 4 years has an enhanced starter pit. So the economics on it are very good. $726 million NPV. And really right now the focus on the project is working on a PFS to be able to be construction ready, and tied into that is wrapping up and getting the permits needed to go ahead and look at construction.
Right.
So while that project's been the flagship and really the reason for the company being in Bolivia and the initial attention, New Pacific has gone and added 2 other projects which both look very promising. And the second project, Carangas, is now advanced to a stage where we're expecting to see an initial resource estimate on what looks like a very large silver deposit, but then also a gold deposit below it. And that should come out later this summer, this resource estimate.
I don't know very much about Bolivia. Is it fairly mining friendly? What is it sort of on the local level?
Bolivia is a mining country. It's really in the culture, and it's hard to go anywhere in Bolivia and not find somebody who's somehow involved in mining. A lot of this is small scale and cooperative type situations, but there have been other larger mines and mines owned by Western companies. Pan American owns a mine in Bolivia that they've been operating for a long time. And actually, just recently, a group of financiers acquired the San Cristobal mine, which has been operating in Bolivia, that was run by Sumitomo, the Japanese mining company. So there's mining culture. What has really, I think, the real thing to comment on Bolivia is after the political change roughly 15 years ago, that was pretty noisy, led to a lot of people sort of leaving the country and a lack of investment. But the Bolivian government is making all the signs and saying all the right things about how they have to be open to foreign investment. And that's what's led to really New Pacific being a pioneer and a number of other companies coming in afterwards.
Right. So there's more companies coming in right now.
There's more companies that have come in since then.
Yeah.
Recognizing the geologic potential that's been untapped.
I'm going to try to not mung up this question too much. I've met with companies, or it's one specific in mind, that's a Buffett-owned company, and they have a style of communication because if Buffett owns them, they have cash. That's how it works with companies he owns, or Berkshire, I should say. And they have a style of approach where they can assess things, even coming on our show. They can assess it so much differently than a lot of other companies can because their supply chains are so good, their customer base is so good, they're just set up right. So every decision, it's like they can take their time and do it. They can be absolute crystal clear. I've just noticed that working with them. So I'm wondering, with you as a mining company, having that type of cash on hand and those type of operations, like pit to port not even being part of the discussion in your operating, which is it's not unheard of, but it's definitely not common. Does it allow you to make like investments in places like Bolivia? It must allow you to approach them with just sort of take your time, do it right, do all the steps, take extra time on the local level, like all these things environmentally. Like I was looking at, and I know this is becoming a long question, but I do want to kind of round it out because it's like on your environmental side, recycling 83.5% of the water on one of your operations in China, or maybe all of them. You can clarify that. But you actually can do those things. You can make those investments, take those times. Do you, and I'm not asking you to call another company out, but do you feel the difference in being able to approach things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real strength in the company is from a technical standpoint, appreciating projects. And does this have an economic deposit? And that's sort of the first question.
Right.
And then after you answer that question, well, it's economic, but will you be allowed to build it and run it? And what will it take in these particular circumstances to do that? And so, what we're doing in China at our mines may be very different than what's being done in Bolivia, but the open-mindedness and the thinking about what's right in this spot and in this country and in these circumstances is, I think, the approach that we're taking. And as we, look to expand and that's really the reason for that buildup in cash is to look at other opportunities around the world. As we look in these other places, we have to be open-minded and say, well, we can bring technical expertise, financial, and through our relationships in China, I think we can bring cost-effective goods and services, equipment, manufacturing to build mines. And then you wrap that up with a philosophy that mining, like any other business, should be about making money, not about putting things up on PowerPoint slides. And
that's kind of what and that's exactly what I'm getting at, is that you can actually afford to take that approach. Whereas if you've got very little capital, cash sitting on the books, you're trying to make things work. Whereas you're not really in that position. You're trying to find what works. And that seems like that's a different position. I mean, looking at other mining companies, for sure, that's a difference.
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to, just like you, I don't want to call anybody out.
There's some great ones.
I don't want to call anybody out, but I was recently at an industry function and sitting at a table of other, peer mining executives, and we were, discussing, how do you grow, and so where do you look to for the next big thing. And my comment was, well, we're doing the work. We're spending the time, we're doing the hard yards to look at things and making sure it's right before we act. And one of the comments from one of these other mining executives says, well, no, you never know what it's going to be like. You just got to go and jump in and do it.
That's exactly what I was getting at.
You sort of look and say, well, no, this is shareholder capital that you're potentially destroying if you make a bad move.
Right.
And so it was a little bit of an interesting philosophical debate there.
A little bit of a different approach.
That's right.
But it's just important, and coming on a show like this and talking about that, it does... I've had conversations about the mining industry competing with industries like tech or even like Bitcoin and all these types of things that are out there now. The dollars are going somewhere, and people that are investing in mining, they should be given that opportunity to invest in companies that are taking that approach, not companies that are just trying to get it done. And they need companies that are actually sitting on a show like this and educating them of what's going on. And I remember even 4 or 5 years ago, a lot of mining companies wouldn't come on and do these long form interviews. They'd go, yeah, well, this we're good, thanks. And are you seeing a shift though? It's another thing I'm curious about being within the industry. Are you seeing more companies trying to make that shift of one, educating people a lot more on their operations and approaching it more of the business model? Do you see any shift on in mining overall?
I mean, I think there's elements where that comes up, and while this is sometimes a bad word, just because of how it's used and the perspective, this ESG push has, I think, brought out some positives, but it also can be a bit of greenwashing in some ways. But I do think that topic has caused people to stop and discuss other factors about building a business and what makes a business sustainable compared to before. So I do think that is one element of it. I think the other fact, and I think it's growing. I think there's a lot of work for the mining industry to do here, is to educate the public who are buying tech companies and want to have all the tech tools and want to transition the economy away from fossil fuels. Is that we need a lot more metal for that to happen.
Yeah.
And so where is that going to come from? We're going to have to make some compromises and some decisions, but let's be open about it. Let's discuss who's doing it, where, and how can we do it sustainably from an environmental standpoint, and then also not disrupting the lives of the communities, where you're operating.
Yeah, I think it's important to be able to have the discussion. I think we are starting to see it now because when, like ESG first started to really get pushed, then there was a lot of course, if you push out one thing, then there's going to be pushback. But I feel like now the conversations are getting a little more settled. I remember I was talking with my business partner about electric cars, for instance, and that transition. So I just want to know the numbers. I don't really have a dog in the fight. I just want to see the numbers. So I looked, and in Vancouver, where we are here, I think it's 1 or 2% are electric cars. And I had an electric car at the time, or like a hybrid plug-in. And I couldn't find anywhere to plug in now. And then I realized if they went up to 50%, the amount of hydro, the amount of mining, like everything that would have to happen just in Vancouver to deliver that. But sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. I'm going to jump back over. I wanted to ask about the recycled water. I wanted to circle back to that because, again, I'm looking at this number, 83.5%. I don't have a comparison. What is that in comparative to what another mine would operate? Because it's under your environmental. And I just wanted to touch a little bit about the environmental side on the mines in China.
Yeah, I mean, that comes back to the fact that if you think of what are the hot button topics, the greenhouse gas emissions is one, water usage is another. Yeah. And water supplies around the world are scarce. Mining is water intensive for the most part. And so what our moves are, and that stat you're referring to is after we upgraded, we were always in compliance, but we upgraded our water treatment plant at one of our mines at the Ying Mining District to be able to move more water quicker through the plant to get it back into operations. And then for the excess, that water leaves in standards that it can be used not just for dust reduction, which is pretty common, greening of the mining facility, but our mine operates really in sort of a farming area. So that water quality that comes out after that water treatment plant can be used in agriculture. So it's just one of those things as part of mining that you have to do now to cut costs, ensure compliance, and be a good corporate citizen.
Expanding on what you said about what did you call it? The nuclear
winter.
The nuclear winter. Can you walk us through a little bit about how Silvercorp was able to actually approach that and sort of what the results of that have been?
Yeah, I mean, the real key factors there are asset quality and attention to management and management discipline. And so when you look through that time period, we've consistently delivered because of our low cost mines. And looking back, our all-in sustaining cost for the fiscal year that just ended in March was $9.75 US to produce an ounce of silver. And so low cost mines is what's led to strong EBITDA margins, and the slide in our
strong is one way of putting it. Yeah,
and so that's strong relative to our peer group, the predominantly silver producers.
Yeah.
So our numbers are higher than that, and our numbers are higher than a lot of other industrial sectors.
Yeah.
From an EBITDA margin. So that's really the indicator for where we've been able to generate cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking down further from a corporate standpoint and the overall return on equity, our return on equity also, as you can see from that chart, has been stronger and more consistently strong compared to our peer group. And the other element that's important when looking at that number is, if you go back to our first slide and the contribution to asset value from cash and investments, those numbers aren't contributing anything to a return on equity calculation. There's no net income associated with the green box and the blue box. And in fact, the blue box, since New Pacific's a exploration company, from an earnings standpoint, we're reflecting our share of their losses because they're not in production in that calculation. So if you took those two elements out of the return on equity calculation that's shown, the number would probably be double what it is.
Wow.
Which is...
You mean double in that these, like this return on equity, that would be double, yeah. Just by because that's with those packaged in.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, those two assets that you're getting in the package aren't delivering earnings. So the only thing that's delivering earnings for the return on equity, the earnings associated with the equity component, is the red box, the mining assets.
And what about, and just to go in further into that, is the social side. You investments in education and tourism, public infrastructure. So I'm reading this off of, I think I took this off a slide or your website. And what is that approach? And I'm trying to understand it from, again, from primarily our audience is U.S. and Canada. So I'm trying to understand it from maybe a comparative. What would an investment in education and social investment be in China in comparison to, let's say, a mine operating here?
I don't know if I have the numbers to make that direct comparison in terms of what the amounts are.
Yeah, more like an approach. I mean,
I think what the approach is in we're very information and education oriented, and so some of those investments that we do is to sponsor local students to go on and do post-secondary education.
Right.
And so we give scholarships and bursaries to students to be able to do that. Other elements are supplying equipment like computers and things for local schools. That's really tied into the education side of things. Other elements are, and you saw that from that slide, is greening of the areas, not just where we're mining, but the general area where we're operating, as well as the reclamation that's ongoing. We've got some really interesting plans. We have to see whether or not they come to fruition, but we've got some interesting plans for reclamation that we're working on that I think will not just be a great thing in terms of how great it sounds, but it'll be a great benefit for us as well going forward. So we'll sort of hold that back for now. But one of the other things, you touched on water. The other, one of the other elements in mining is waste, and obviously tailings have to go somewhere. We're doing a good job at our GC mine of both dry stacking and then putting a number of the tailings back underground in paste backfill. We're looking at doing that at Ying as well. That's our larger operation. But on the waste rock side, we built a waste rock treatment facility at Ying that can treat up to 1 million tons of waste rock a year.
Wow.
And what it does is it turns it into 2 different aggregate products that can be sold into the aggregate market. So if you look at that, not a huge dollar investment, and we're not planning on making profits from the operation. That's going to be done as a cooperative with the local community.
I see.
But it's sort of this, triple bottom line win for everybody. It reduces reclamation footprint and an ultimate cost. It provides an economic benefit to the community. And then the other thing is as your audience would know, you never want to be mining aggregates far from where you need them. By supplying them from this aggregate plant, we eliminate the need to open up another quarry in the area, making a mess and tearing up the landscape to provide those materials needed for construction. So there's a lot of benefits from some of these things that we're doing.
So with these looking at the operations within China and everything, all the knowledge and expertise, the technology that's been developed in operating those mines, how much of a transfer does that, I want to talk about the Philippines project in a moment. How much does that expertise then transfer over to places like Bolivia, the Philippines, and other investments you make around the world, essentially?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Bolivia is a different environment for sure than China. But touching on one topic again, water, which we just chatted about in China, the needs in Bolivia are different. Bolivia does have a rainy season, but that water runs away and is gone for most of the year. The mining operation will need water. So the plan in construction is to build a retention dam and collect rainwater. That will meet the mine's needs, but there will probably be, excess water available that can be shared with the community.
Right.
And part of the legacy items after the closure of the mine will basically be able to, gift and give this dam to the community to have as an ongoing source of water. So different situation, a different answer. But again, thinking about what are the things that you can build that are cooperative and are useful. You mentioned the Philippines. The mine that's contemplated there is an underground copper gold mine producing concentrates.
Oh, it's an underground one.
It would be an underground mine. And we see direct analogs with our GC mine that we're operating in China. And in fact, the management team at Celsius, the Australian company that we are looking to acquire, they visited the GC mine and were very impressed with how the mining operations were run, how the mill was run, the fact that the tailings are being done in a dry stack tailings facility, the underground paste backfill that I mentioned. So when they're looking at thinking of how the mine would be built in the Philippines, they can point to a direct comparison that we've built and are running in full compliance in China. So,
where is that? Well, the Philippines project. What stage is that at? Is that?
They've done 2 resource estimates, and in between those, they did effectively like a PEA or a scoping study.
Yeah, and where is your investment? You own.
Well, what we've announced is the intention, and that was a non-binding term sheet to acquire the company. Total acquisition cost is around 56 million Australian, and at the time of the announcement, we also did a funding just to bridge them through to the end of the acquisition.
Right.
And so we're looking to finalize and get a definitive agreement signed here shortly, and then move ahead to the shareholder meeting, et cetera, to close the transaction. But we're working in cooperation with them, looking at the game plan for funding, for what are the next steps that need to get done. And what they've done a great job of is advancing this project technically, working it through the Philippine permitting environment, but then also establishing good relationships, again, with the local community who are on side with the development plans for the mine.
And where is that? Where would the mine be located?
Well, it's in the northern part of Luzon Island, so northwest of Manila.
Okay, jumping over to kind of tying together the technology, and this is a question I'm glad you're here because we've done so many data and sensor technology episodes lately. Like, I mean, a lot. So it's been just, for me, it's been like an overload of information. And so I need to ask, as a mine operator, how do you filter through all the capabilities? I mean, you just need to, like, a quick Google search and you can find 20 different sensors that could go in your mine, and then gathering that data, distributing that data, managing it. Safety. I mean, it's so much, and it's all amazing. When I do these episodes, it's incredible what's being developed. But I'm really curious how you approach, and I don't know if this is your area that you're looking at in the mine, so I'm trying to throw one at you. But just approach how to even filter all of this out. And I've been waiting to ask a mine operator this question, so you're my first victim.
Well, I don't think I'm a victim because I think I have a really good answer to that. And yes, there's a lot of different things that can be added, but it really comes back to that core philosophy, which is what is happening, how are you tracking it, how are you communicating that information when it's a lot of information, a lot of data, how do you get things out of paper and into files that can be stored, replicated, run reports on it. And that is something that the company has been involved in going back to sort of 2011, 2012, and built a tool in-house that has been used. I actually even have it on my phone.
Oh, okay.
And so my view of it on my phone is more related to my area of expertise. But everybody at the mine site has this application, and depending on what your role is, you will see a different view of it. It will allow you to input information on the spot, information that then gets put into the databases, triggers other workflow, alerts people. So it has had broad-ranging applications, and whether that's from exploration. So if you look at our Ying mine, at times we've had 80 drill rigs drilling across the 7 mining units. So if you think there's a lot of geologists, a lot of drillers, a lot of core that's being produced.
That's a ton.
How do you go and both assign, plan, execute, collect the information, put it somewhere, and then have the ability to link it back in a database when the assays come back. Just not get sort of a list of assays show up and not really be able to try to tack them, onto what the objectives were. That goes all the way through to operations, mill operations, the mining side, safety as well, collecting data that is important. And this is all what helps streamline the operations, and it's also helps you mitigate against risk.
Right. Yeah.
If something is out of whack in terms of data or information or sensor readings, you're not waiting for someone to sort of walk the file over and hand it to somebody. That workflow gets triggered in the system.
How different from let's say starting in 2011 to now though? How different does that data collection and distribution and management look from what it did now? I mean, 12, 13 years ago.
I think workflow has been added. So as you look, it comes down to business analysis and looking at, what other workflows are taking place that aren't really being tracked. Obviously, there's better tools now for cloud data storage and communication, wireless communication underground, connecting things to the sensors. And, we went through a few years ago a big mill automation program at Ying. For the number 2 mill.
I wish I had known that. I would have had more questions prepared on that. That sounds
well. I might not be the right person to get into all the details on that, but when you drill down and you look and say, how do you use less reagents? How do you have less people in operations? And it's not as though we're getting rid of people. Trust me, we have
that's
lots
not how
it works. Lots of places where people can go, but it's a matter of cutting some of those numbers and making things happen, through automation. And
well, that actually leads to another good question about this, is that as you get more automated and more data, you're able to, because it's not getting easier to find people to operate and who understand. And has that allowed you to, one, retain people, but also, it's not about making less people at the mine. It's about being able to attract the right people and not lose talent or be stretched so thin that you've got people that aren't qualified having to do a job because now you have these automations in place.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and that goes back to that comment about making investments in education. And so when you look at that and you think of the size of the operation, the number of people that we have, there's established links with universities to promote having students and bring people on board.
Right.
There's quite a proactive program for getting people to think about new ideas and funding the application for patents, and we get patents, and in fact we've been recognized, ironically, for being a high-tech enterprise.
Oh, really?
At Ying, and it's gotten the stamp from the Chinese government saying that the investment that you're making and the things that you're doing to be on the cutting edge of mining or geology or other elements of the mining process qualify you as a high-tech enterprise, which gives us some tax benefits, actually.
Oh, well, that's also good too. I was going to ask you. Oh, I don't. I was going to ask about the just so we wrap up the interview. The looking forward is Silvercorp. You know, looking. Are they sort of always looking now? Is that as a part of the strategy to find the next project? What's sort of the approach? The 5-10 year.
Well,
outlook?
I'd say that has been a continuous approach.
Okay.
And really, the last time we had a notable acquisition news release was, again, looking back 2020, we had identified a target that we were ready to buy, and it was going to shift our focus, or at least add a new focus, gold and in South America. Ultimately, we didn't end up winning that one, but we've been really quite continuous in the reviews of other projects. And coming back to something we talked about earlier, does that project have the technical merit? Does it look like there's a runway to actually get it permitted and built in a sustainable fashion? So a lot of projects have failed since then to meet those criteria. What we found this year, and Celsius is a prime example, that's the project in the Philippines. There's been some good projects we found, and it looks like the groups on the other side are open to transacting with us. So I would say we are optimistic as a company that we'll have a series of news releases coming up that will paint a picture that in the next sort of 3 to 5 years, we will have a number of different operations running in different places and be a larger and more diversified company.
What do you think the responsibility is of, ESG, of course, is a big topic. What do you think the responsibility is of as governments are demanding a transition, to electric and things like that? What do you think the responsibility is of the government to get these mines operating? And then the flip side is, what is the responsibility of the mines who are going into these communities, all over the world, to make sure that they're adding to the community, not taking away from it, which historically has happened. We've talked about it on the show. Where do you think that responsibility is, and how? And this is a big question, and then also, how do mines need to approach educating people more so it doesn't get confused of what this mine is going to bring to the community? It's every company is trying to manage that. It's a big question, but what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think the challenge that governments in most places are somewhat transitory in the sense that they might be around for 4 or 5 years and then there's a new government.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge unless they can put infrastructure and it's a bad word, but it can also be a good word, unless you put long-standing bureaucracy in place that works as a system, year in and year out, to have a balanced approach to resource development. So, yeah.
That's an interesting point, though, is that governments, if I'm taking what you're saying right, is that they need to put systems in place that are transferable to the next government, so that we're not getting this stop and start approach in a world that's demanding product. I mean, that the increase, it's just going to keep going up and up. I mean, the copper demand, if you look at those charts, it's just right out of it. So they really need to put those systems in place. Have you seen, like maybe China, they're doing it. Have you seen governments that are actually doing that? Have you seen examples of it? In transitory governments,
I think that is challenging. I think this is a bit of a new topic, and what people are quick to jump on are the sound bites and the promises, and not really recognizing that those promises don't mean much unless you really put money and effort behind a holistic approach to resource development.
Yeah.
So I think that remains to be seen. I do think it's going to come down to the companies and really working much more focused with the governments, central, provincial, local, and then the actual community, because really, if you don't do it right, you might get a good headline at the beginning. You might get a couple years out of it, but you're not going to get the value creation if you then stub your toe and your mine gets closed because the community is not in support,
right?
And you're not delivering on the promises. So So I think a lot of that work is going to come down to the companies getting smarter and thinking about this and recognizing the sort of share of the economic pie. You can either address this up front and realize how that pie is going to get divided up.
Yeah.
And if you think you can get away with dividing that pie sort of only in your favor,
Right.
you're at risk. And we've seen that. We've seen that in a number of places in recent years.
Yeah, and do you think mines? Well, I'll go with Silvercorp. That how important is that element of even coming on a show like this or other forms of communication and having those discussions? Because from my end, I have noticed a very big shift in the last 4 or 5 years. Again, operators would not come and do hour-long discussions with us. It was a no. And all of a sudden now we're seeing. I mean, we've had multiple operators now come on the show, and just in the last 18 months, kind of, you're seeing that shift. Our minds starting to realize we need to be out front and talking to people. Because from a media approach, if you're not out front talking, a narrative is going to get picked up. So you need to be out there talking.
Right.
And do you think have you taken that approach? I mean, you're on the show. So was that a specific approach to go, let's get out there and start actually having conversations?
Well, I think that is important, because if we want to move forward, and you think of the parties that are going to be involved with allowing us to build a mine, whether that's the management and board of a potential takeover target, their shareholders who might end up shareholders of Silvercorp, whether that's the government where that project is, everyone has the ability to go out and, as you said, do your research. And if you're not talking the talk and then backing it up, people will jump to their own assumptions, their own conclusions.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be out there saying what we do, what we plan to do, and then sticking to that and being consistent. And that will help us attract support for executing our business plan.
Yeah. I'll just wrap up with just a professional business development or professional development question before I let you go. Over the last, for you, how long have you been in the mining industry?
Well, I started in the capital market side of mining over 25 years ago, and I've had a few stints outside of mining, but then I've been back in it either on a financing advisory or in the executive team.
Yeah. So people watching the show, it's all ages, all different stages in their careers. What do you think? You've been quite successful in your career, and so what do you think has led to that? A really simple question. What do you think has led to that success? What have you brought to companies like Silvercorp or in your other roles that gave you that edge, that allowed you to have success?
Well, I think it comes down to being open to learning and looking at figuring how things work. And if you figured out how one thing works over in one spot, how does that translate into another area? And so what I've found in these different roles that I've had, there's been overlap, which has helped pick up these different roles I've taken on. But then in each new role, there's been a new element, something new that's had to I've had to learn. As we talked about, before we began this, I never anticipated years ago that I would be, sitting at a table with a headset on, doing interviews that were going to be pushed out on the internet. But it's important as part of being a shepherd of a mining company to get out there and to tell investors what we're doing, to tell governments if they're doing research on us and looking into the company, potential partners, the communities. It's important to be an outgoing spokesperson, and so that's a new thing that I've learned over the years.
When you started your career, what did you think you were? 25 years ago, day one. Where did you think it was going, as opposed to now?
Well, it started off in finance and really on the capital market side, researching companies from an investment standpoint and trying to pick out good investments. Yeah. And I thought it would lead to something like that, either continuing that or going into portfolio management. Yeah.
I'm going to ask one last question. Again, it's the big picture question, and I promise it will be my last one. But are we going to see, as mines are trying to get going here, and this demand is increasing, and of course it's not an actual prediction. I'm just in the next. Are they places even like Canada and that these mines are taking a long time to get going? is it like the dam is going to break? If you were to just make a prediction, is it going to get to a point where we just need them? So now we need to green light. And my concern about that is then things get green lit that shouldn't have, because all of a sudden the demand is so great that then you start pushing stuff through, which is never a good approach. Do you think if we don't start taking action to get these mines operating, that we run the risk of that happening?
I don't think that's the case.
No.
I think what's going to happen is we're just not going to hit the targets that we want.
Right.
Because I think there's enough information now that people have that the public, the communities are not going to be prepared to accept something that's not done right.
Right.
And so instead, it just won't get done.
It just gets kicked down the road.
It'll get kicked down the road, and all of these targets that people are setting for what we're going to be doing and how our society is going to be looking like will not get met.
Yeah.
And we'll be in a different picture at that point, making new targets, new promises, or looking at how we govern ourselves going forward at that time. Yeah.
Well, in Silvercorp's case, you're definitely putting out product and putting out cash. So it's great to see. And thanks for coming. This is a different type of interview. You know, the last one is, we're looking at monitors remotely, and it's just, you sort of go through the talking points. So I appreciate you actually letting me take you down some of these these rabbit holes.
No, that's good. I enjoy the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Lon.
Thanks, Jared.
And thank you everybody for watching. I mean, if you like mining, I think you would have got some pretty good information from that interview. And of course, we're going to have links and everything to Silvercorp, where you can check out more information and more detailed information about them. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for all our sponsors and supporters, and for people like CIM, bringing people like Silvercorp to us to be featured on the show. It's just amazing getting all this information about the mining industry. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next episode of Mining Now.